It's not 5 o'clock, and they don't care. Welcome to Wine to 5. Entertainment, education, and everyday drinking for everyday people. Your hosts are Valerie Caruso and Stephanie Davis, two wine educators who don't need a clock to know when to pour that next glass.
Hello, curious wine lovers and students of fermented drink. Val and I have a glass full of information and announcements this week.
Well, actually, I have 5 glasses in front of me because we are discussing cider. And we will be also announcing our book for our Wine to 5 book club and our drawing for the October Patreon winner. So we got a lot to get to. But the first thing we want to get to is what's in Steph's glass. What do you got?
Well, I have a very giant wine glass. It's like almost taller than my head. Yeah, after I went and got my hair did yesterday, I walked over to Scrumpy's Hard Cider Bar. And I'd never been there before. It's in Fort Collins. And what's cool about it, it's the home of Summit Cider, but Scrumpy's is the tap house. So you can try a bunch of different ciders, but you can also try other ciders, some meads, beer, and wine on tap. And it was hard to, decide what I was going to drink on today's show. But I bellied up to the bar. It was really tough, But I did ask about growlers, seasonal specialty things, and anything else I really should know. And some of these combinations, like flavor combinations, were so fun. Strawberry basil, which is amazing.
Yum.
The Brumpy's Oak Aged Cider. That was fun. Totally different. And I didn't try Raspberry, but it's a raspberry habanero cider.
Oh, like the Primo Jam that we did last summer.
Totally like that. Yeah.
Delish,
yes. And there's a cider. They had so many to choose from. One of them was called Dances with Squirrels.
Sorry.
Isn't that so fun? And so that one has local Macintosh apples and heirloom crab apples. And oh my God, I just like those. That's just fun. Like, I want to sit around and drink cider and come up with silly names like that.
I just want to drink anything called Dances with Squirrels.
I know. Especially for anybody who had, any of your friends who have serious squirrel phobias. Maybe you should get them a growler of Dances with Squirrels and see what they do. But
that is
maybe
fantastic.
There's one that we could get rapping and dancing with squirrels for you, Val.
Oh my God, that is so funny. I don't know, were you here when you saw that squirrel that hangs upside down next to our back door and peeks in?
No. Do you have a name for him?
I don't think we do, but when my friends Joe and Becky were here a couple years ago, we're having breakfast, and this squirrel was hanging upside down on the stucco and peeking his head around into the back door, and it was just the balls on this thing. I'm just
God.
Really?
Right.
Yeah.
I love the squirrels. Now that we don't have dogs, we have a squirrel that is now in our backyard every day, all the time, and it's kind of fun because he jumps around and he comes onto the deck, and you're like, oh, we don't have a dog, but we do have a squirrel.
Oh, I love it. That is so funny.
Yeah, but so what's in my glass? I ended up coming home with the Summit Dry Cider, and it's like a champagne style, very classic, clean, just a clean, nice cider. And I also came home with a 6-pack of bottles of the Della's Apple Strudel. And that cider, it tastes like apple pie. I mean, it has nutmeg in it and has cinnamon. And it really would take that edge off. If you were having a dessert craving, you could just share a bottle of that, or just have the whole thing already. Get over yourself, but just have it, and you'll be like, I don't have the chocolate craving or the dessert ice cream craving anymore. Yeah, so. And I totally am going to take you and John when you come up next month. We're going to go to Scrumpy's.
Oh my gosh, that sounds like so much fun.
Yes. So what have you got over there? I can't see any of your glassware.
No, because it's down on the desk, but I'm having a tasting. Like I mentioned, I've got 5 glasses in front of me, and I'm just going to sip these throughout the show and see which one I drink throughout the show the most. See which one ends up empty.
Okay.
So we'll see which one I really love. And I'm not a big rater. I don't like to critique or write tasting notes on these. I just don't like to do that. I don't like to read them. I don't like to write them. But I'll tell you what's in my glasses real quick, guys. And we'll just put the rest of the notes up on the blog in case you want to go looking for these. The first one is by West County. It's called Cidre de Garde. And that's kind of an homage to the French cider, which is spelled Cidre. And also in the Basque Country of Spain as well. And they use specific heirloom cider apples to make this. It's 6.3% ABV, and it is all apples. And then the second one I have, this one is really funky. I'm going to hold it up so you can see it. This is Fin River.
Oh.
And it's sidra, S-I-D-R-A, which is the Spanish word for cider.
And it's really light in color.
It's very light in color. It's from the Olympic Peninsula in Washington. It's 6.5% ABV. And it's made with all organic apples and organic cane sugar. And what they do is they ferment it in open tanks. So it's kind of rustic and funky and unfiltered. And the Spanish style of cider, as we'll talk about later, is actually kind of in line with this, except for, I think, the added sugar. Although it's not sweet. I have to say, it is a dry cider.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Third one I have here is JK's. Look at the color on this beautiful thing. This is called the Pear, P-A-I-R, but
golden.
Yeah, it's beautiful golden color. It's the Perry Farmhouse Organic Hard Cider. It's from Almar Orchards in Flushing, Michigan. So I'm kind of all over the country here so far. 5.5% ABV, unfiltered also, but it's not too cloudy.
No.
And there's nothing in here but pear and apple juice and yeast.
That's cool.
But it's...
Getting a little sip?
I said I was going to make notes on this, but this is actually off dry. So the one that added sugar is dry. The one that didn't add sugar is actually off dry. So they must have stopped fermentation a little bit earlier. It is a degree lower on the alcohol scale. So I thought that was interesting. They also make an organic Winterruption cuvee, which has all the spices and maple syrup in it. We haven't opened it, but I bought it.
Oh, I'd like that.
Yeah, the guy at Veterans Liquor, he loved it. So I grabbed that one too. I also have here from Sweden, the Rekorderlig Premium Pear Hard Cider. And I thought it was important to have a pear one in here because Perry pears are an important part of cider and also the Calvados industry as well. So this one they recommend serving over ice. It's got a nutrition label. It's 4.5% ABV. I was skeptical because it has a lot of ingredients, which is why I didn't pick it out, including coloring like caramel color. And so that is this one. But look, there's hardly any color to it. It's very pale and it still has a nice fizz on it as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to be honest, I wasn't looking for anything that had artificial stuff in it, but it came at a recommendation and it is actually quite delicious. So shout out to Stacy at Veterans Liquors for pointing me in that direction. And then my final joy in front of me, look at this gorgeous thing.
Whoa.
This is California Cider Company's ACE, A-C-E.
Is that the darkest one of them all?
It is. It is the California Pumpkin Hard Cider, Sonoma County, California. 5% ABV. It's obviously a seasonal. It does contain some additives, flavor, spices, but this one's interesting because they used carbonated water and fermented juice and then just added stuff to it.
Wow. Huh.
So instead of carbonating it like, adding the CO2 like soda, they said they actually added carbonated water on the ingredients list. And I thought that was interesting. All these different ways cider can be made.
How are you enjoying that one? Because I've had some pumpkin ciders before, and just like pumpkin beer or anything else, they're all so different.
Yes, this one is interesting because it's got the aromas of fall that we all love. It's not overly aromatic. It's still nice. And you can see I've got them in little brandy snifters here so I can kind of concentrate the aromas. It's not sweet. And so for that reason, I'm enjoying it. It's not sticky sweet. I think it's got a nice clean finish. It is nice fall, very light, but I like it.
Well, and I really like that Rekorderlig, and I have had that in Sweden, of course, and that memory makes it that much more pleasurable. Mm-hmm. But I've also bought it here in town, and they have quite a few different flavors to choose from. I really do enjoy it a lot. And I have found it at a restaurant in town that, was one of those fast casual restaurants.
Uh-huh.
And they had Rekorderlig cider. That's one of the reasons why I think it's great to have an episode on cider, because it's becoming so popular now, and there's a lot of things that are in common with wine in the production of the growing of the apples, the selecting of the fruit, and everything else. So I think it's cool as an alternative to beer, but also an alternative to wine. And there's many people out there that still haven't really experienced it or done any exploration on cider. And sometimes you only see the Angry Orchard, is it, cider, I think?
Yep. And I think that was one of the ones we have to thank for bringing the Cider Renaissance to America, because it was something that we didn't drink for a long time. I mean, I used to drink it in England. I used to drink the woodpecker.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, when I first got to England, I didn't drink a lot of beer. When I went to the pub, I drank the woodpecker.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's what I remember as cider. So when Angry Orchard came out and all these other ones, then I think that's an East Coast one as well. That was one of the very first ones that got popular that kind of helped with their little cider renaissance, if you will.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's cool that a lot of times when I go out, I can already assume that cider is a choice wherever I'm going. And I like that. You know, I sometimes feel like the wine maybe selection is lacking, but I'm not feeling in the mood for beer. And it's a treat to have a cider choice.
It is. The other night I had a lamb burger, and they had a bourbon barrel aged. It was a Colorado cider, and I cannot remember the producer, but I had that. And it did have a little more sweetness than I really wanted with my dinner, but it was still enjoyable.
Mm-hmm.
But it had me wishing I'd ordered wine, but it was still, I think, had I not been looking for something a little bit more in depth and dark to have with that lamb burger, I thought, well, you know, I drank it. But it's interesting. There are so many different styles of cider and so many ways of making it. But should we move on?
Let's dive in. Let's get to the history of cider. Let's go back in time.
Yeah, we're not going to go like way, way back. I mean, as far as details go, but we did actually turn to the National Apple Museum. And first of all, yes, there is a National Apple Museum in Biglerville, Pennsylvania, my home state.
Have you been?
No, I didn't know it existed.
Oh, next time.
I had no idea. I mean, you grow up, and even in Virginia, or when I was stationed out in Illinois in the 80s, they had apple orchards, and you go out and you pick your own apples and pick your own pumpkins, and that's kind of a big deal. But of course, we're not thinking about hard cider. And so this episode, we're going to be talking about hard cider. We keep saying cider, and when we think of cider, a lot of us think about apple cider that we drink when we're kids, you know, or that we get at the orchards and things like that. But in America, we actually call it hard cider because we're talking about alcoholic cider. But they do cover it on the National Apple Museum page. The information we got there was so much of it. We're just going to link it up and let you guys go nuts on it if you're into this topic, because I thought it was so interesting. But like many alcoholic beverages, we can actually go back to the Romans and thank them because they stumbled across it, perhaps literally, in England around 55 BC. And the English were already making it, so there's no way of tracing back how long they'd been making it or anything like that. But Europe had an established cider culture over the years, and it was in the 9th century that there's evidence that apple orchards were intentionally planted to support the beverage's popularity. And again, like other alcoholic beverages, such as wine and beer, the monks got in on the action.
Yeah, they did.
Yes, and they helped proliferate this in the medieval area as well. And then in America, we have the English to thank for bringing their apple seeds and their know-how to our fair colony. Because grains, as well as the Vitis vinifera grapes, if you look back at viticulture or history, they were not growing very well in America's soil. So it was the apple trees that supplied early settlers with a good amount of fermented fun. And we all remember the Johnny Appleseed story. Yeah. But it's important to note, again, like I said, in U.S. we call it hard cider because we have a non-alcoholic version we call cider. And in England, you may want to look at the ABV before ordering cider for your children, because over there it's all alcoholic for the most part.
I still feel like when I'm talking to people, sometimes there is that confusion when I'm saying cider this, cider that, and they're like, huh? And then I'm like, you know, it's like beer, it's like hard cider. And they're like, oh, maybe they've never had it, or they just thought I was talking about
non-alcoholic cider the whole time. And I'm like, well, I think so you have to make sure you're on the same page with whoever you're talking to.
Absolutely. I mean, it's the regular cider, that apple cider that I put in my apple cider bourbon cocktail. It's not hard cider. If you're out there thinking, oh my gosh, Val's mixing bourbon in one of these alcoholic ciders. Not that probably would make a bad cocktail. I don't even know, so I'm not a mixologist, but I can tell you that over the years, both abroad and here in the U.S., cider's popularity did rise and fall from the 17th century on. But today it's making a comeback. And as we mentioned earlier, one of those being Angry Orchard was partially responsible for that, but there are others. But a large part of it has to do with the craft beverage movement as well. Think about the craft beer movement. And a lot of people are getting in on making their own cider and craft ciders. And like I mentioned, some are bourbon barrel aged, but it is clearly a cider resurgence or a renaissance, and we're on board. So
I'm sure that the prohibition had something to do with why, cider wasn't really around, like most things.
It could have been, and I didn't look back into that history, but there is a smithsonianmag.com article about the ancient origins of apple cider as well, and we'll link that up. You guys can geek out on that, but I didn't think you'd want us reading you that today. But we'll tell you how it's made. And like the production of other beverages, technology and know-how has impacted how cider's been produced over hundreds of years. So back in the day, the apples were hand harvested, or they were beaten from the trees with like a wooden pole or a wooden stick.
Yeah.
And then they were left in like a tub or something they called a tump, and they were covered with hay for a few weeks. And this would allow the fruit to kind of dry out, allow the sugars to concentrate. And then at that time, the apples would be milled. So, of course, we didn't have big presses or anything like that. If you've ever gone to, what is that cider mill in Vermont that we went to? I can't remember. We got to watch him make the apple cider. And it was really cool the way they, they cover it in a cloth and they press and then they, press again. But back in the day, they used to use like a mortar and pestle or some form of trough made of wood. And then, of course, along came the stone mills. Think about the horse and they drive around in a circle. You see that, something like that when you're seeing tequila or mezcal made, or old grape presses and olive oil, things like that. There's a little more involved in the process, however. And so we'll link up the National Apple Museum's page on this if you really want to geek out on pulp. Something called cheese, but not the kind of cheese you're thinking of, and something called horsehair. Yes, the kind of horsehair you're thinking of. But these are all terms that people who make apple cider know what those things mean. But of course, after milling and they get the juice, and you got to think, it does take a lot of milling to get the juice from the apples because there's a lot of meal in there, just like with pears. So we'll link up a video that shows you a modern day pressing and fermentation, a modern day production of cider by Old Hill Cider. And that was really cool to see.
Good video to watch too.
Yeah. What I think is important also, Steph, I didn't know how many kinds of apples there were until I started learning about spirits and precisely Calvados. Did you?
No, it's just over the time that I've gotten into cider. A few years ago, there was a local cider brand that opened called Out Cider. And these two guys that started their cidery, they contacted me. They got my name from somebody that we knew, and they said, we're starting our own cidery, and since you've got a palate for wine, we were hoping you would maybe come over and taste some of our cider and give us some feedback. And I thought that was so cool. And so it was then when I really started to appreciate cider and all of the apples, the different apples, and how common the commonalities, between wine and cider. And even the different tannins that come from certain kinds of apple varieties, that you're trying to get acid and tannin balance in the cider like you are with a wine. And obviously with the sugars too. So I started to get into it, but I think, there's so much more to learn, just like in any kind of fermented beverage. You can really dive in and get geeky about it. But yeah, it's crazy that what little we know about the apples that are used in cider, because when we think of apples, we think of what's at the grocery store.
Right. And a lot of times these are not what is used in cider.
Yeah, not.
Yeah, or to make Calvados, which is really just a distilled apple cider that's made into brandy.
Yeah.
When I was learning about Calvados, I remember I either watched a Charles Neal video or I listened to a Somm Guild podcast with Charles Neal about Calvados.
Yeah, I think there is an episode on Guild Somm about Calvados.
And of course, and it was in my diploma book too. I had a spirits book. I want to say it was written by Dave Broom, but they categorize these different apples as what they call bittersweet, bitter sharp, sharp, and sweet. And then there's certain requirements for how many apples or how much of each category of juice that they use, because like you said, each one brings either tannins or acids or sugars to the party. And most of these apples, they're like crab apples. They're like things you don't want to eat.
Yeah.
And I could not believe the different varieties of apples. And of course, that's when I also learned that they can use pears, pears in some, I think it was a Domfronte Calvados as well. But back to the cider, while there are many types of apples that we can use to produce the ciders, pears are also used. Like I mentioned, the Perry pears. In fact, I've got one right here.
Mm-hmm.
So when you see Perry cider, chances are it's made with both apple and pear juice.
Yeah. And I really have enjoyed, I think, pretty much every Perry cider I've had. I mean, I particularly like pears. So, I mean, I think it's delicious. And just like cider, it also has its own spectrum of, dry to sweet, but something to look at too.
In fact, this recorder leg is all pear that I have here in front of me. And then I've got one that's pear and apple, which I'm so far thinking this one I'm enjoying the most. This is
Which one?
This is the JK's Perry Farmhouse Organic Cider from Flushing, Michigan. Unfiltered, collaboration with Garth Farm, nothing but pear and apple juice and yeast. And it is delicious. It's really nicely balanced. I think so far this is becoming my favorite of the 5 in front of me. It's leading the pack as far as which glass is going to be drained by the end of the show. But like I mentioned, all these styles in front of me, they're just as there are different kinds of apples and pears used, there are different styles. Like some of these are sparkling, some are not. And there's even a port style that we cannot get our hands on from Foggy Ridge. And I even asked her, but I think they were sold out last year when we were trying to do a show with her. But we cannot get our mitts on this port style cider.
It sounds so cool. I mean, if you click on the link to Foggy Ridge and you look at it, you're like, I need that right now. Like, that has to have, like, Merry Christmas to me or something. Like, where can I get that?
Yeah, she uses a Pippin Gold apple for that. So a lot of times they'll tell you what kind of apples they use. So you can have sparkling ciders, like this one from Sweden still has a really nice mousse on it. It's the only one that still has kind of a fizz going. And you can have the still, and usually the Spanish kinds are kind of still. Steph, you mentioned a Scrumpy earlier, and apparently that's a style also that doesn't use commercial yeast or any other kind of additives.
And on the Scrumpy website, they say that the term Scrumpy is defined as like the cider that's using unwanted, undesirable, like apples that have fallen from the tree. That makes it a Scrumpy cider, and it's usually higher in alcohol. So I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah, Scrumpy apples for a Scrumpy cider.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I already mentioned the French style, the cidre, at the CIDRE, which tend to have lower ABVs. But then there are farmhouse styles that can be up to the alcohol by volume of wine in sort of 12%. But note that if it's over 12% alcohol, then it's considered apple wine. Just so you know.
Just so you know, just to be technical.
So if you have a French farmhouse, then you're like, what? Then I've seen a lot of those around 6% in France as well. So, it's not definitive, but there are different kinds of styles just to kind of give you an idea of what is in the bottle, because you can be facing this refrigerator full of cider like I was yesterday. I'm like, I have no flipping idea where to start.
Yeah.
So I had to call the guy over. I'm like, all right, I got websites up, whatever. The Sidra, S-I-D-R-A, like I mentioned, Spanish style, normally funky, musty, tart, made with natural yeast, normally no sugars. Now, the one I have here from Washington did have added cane sugar, and it's usually not sparkling. It's usually still.
I've never had one of those, so I'm going to look for that.
This one is...
Does it say sidra on it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, they actually said that in the label. But Yeah, there's so much more to learn, but we thought we'd scratch the surface in case you're standing there facing the fridge full of cider and going, what? And you see farmhouse and you might go, okay, that's probably going to have a little more ABV. Or you see sidra, you might be able to go, okay, that's going to be funky. And I'm starting to think that people that like the sidra would probably be those people that like a sour beer.
Oh, okay. That's a good way to describe.
It's super tart.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not my style. I keep trying to like sour beers because I love sour, but I just can't. And I keep doing it to myself. I'm like, I'm going to order one. And I'm like, oh, why'd I do that? But there's a whole bunch more resources on ciderschool.com and cidersage.com. And it's ridiculously comprehensive, resource-intensive websites full of joy, assembled by Colorado's own Dan Doherty, also a St. Vrain Cidery, which I didn't see yesterday. And he's at Cider Sage on Twitter. I just learned about him today. Seriously.
That's good. He's like your neighbor.
Yeah.
Maybe he's more like my neighbor.
Yeah, he's up in Longmont, I think, but you can find him on Twitter if you've got cider questions. Sorry, Dan, you don't know we're pimping you out, but we are. And he's also got a lot of books, and we'll link those up as well. But there's one called Craft Cider Making, and he even posts some YouTube videos on how they're making their homemade cider.
That's cool.
Yeah, definitely check out at Cider Sage on Twitter, and he's got a lot of knowledge to offer you guys on cider.
Yeah, and a bunch of books here that'll be on the blog for anybody who wants to dig into that, or buy a book to give to somebody that really is into cider, even if you're not.
Absolutely. So see how we punted that to somebody we don't even know?
I love it. That was smart.
We talked about cider. Here, Dan, it's all yours. Boom.
I know.
What about the factoid, Steph?
I wanted to give a factoid really just on how to store cider. And it was important for me because I bought this growler. And so I was kind of like, I wonder what the stability is going to be like and how long I'll be able to enjoy this. So as you can imagine, short-term, immediate gratification, you're buying it, you're putting it in the fridge, and you're drinking it. Okay, so what about like this growler? Well, if you haven't poured any of it out and it's filled up to the top, it's going to keep for a week or so. But once you start serving out of the growler, which is what I did, I just pulled up to my neighbor's house. I didn't even come home. I just opened the growler and shared it with Herb and Lynn, and we had half of the bottle yesterday. So I wanted to know how long it would last, and what I was told, and I confirmed when I was looking it up, but the bartender at Scrumpy's Tap House was telling me, you can enjoy it for a few days. It actually has a longer shelf life in the fridge than an open growler of beer, which is really kind of limited to 1 to 2 days, 36 hours is sort of an open bottle of growler of beer. And he explained that even when cider loses some of its carbonation, it's still really good, unlike beer. So maybe 4 days is kind of once it's opened. It just kind of depends really on the cider, how carbonated it is and the sugar content and the alcohol. And that leads me to say, when you're storing it long term, let's say you have a bomber or something, a large bottle of cider, and you're thinking maybe I'm going to hold on to it. Or somebody said this tastes really good if you cellar it or age it for a little while. Well, so if you have the patience for that, make sure you keep it in a cool, dark place. And then, it's a very broad window. It could be 6 months to 2 years, maybe even longer. Like I said, just depends on the alcohol content. But ballpark for enjoying it and storing it is right around that 50 degrees. Because like wine, you're going to store it like wine if you're going to age it. But like wine, you don't want to serve it too cold, because if you serve it right out of your refrigerator, you're really missing out on a lot of the pretty aromatics and nuances. So if you have it a little bit warmer than refrigeration temperature, and that's also how you should store it. So right around 50 degrees, maybe you can drink it a little bit cooler, maybe you store it a little bit warmer, but that's just your general target. So that was kind of the factoid about that. I'm having, I'm on day 2 here of my growler, and it's drinking just like it did yesterday. So it's very fresh, and I'm still enjoying it.
Yeah, I opened these about 20 minutes early because I was putting them all in separate glasses and numbering the bottles and everything. And, and like you said, it's going to depend on how they were made, too. Some of these have preservatives. Some of them don't. So it's going to depend on the style. I actually have 2 that are in 750s. And the rest are in single-serve bottles. And so I put little champagne preservers, the little twisty...
Yeah.
The Metro cane. Yeah, so I actually put those on the bottles to maintain them, just like you would a bottle of sparkling wine.
Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you had any more thoughts about which one of those glasses was your favorite? I saw you over there. You were really thinking. You were like swirling in a meditative space with your cider.
Yeah, it's funny because we schedule it so while one of us is talking, the other one can drink. I really like the West County Cidre de Garde, and that comes in a beautiful, elegant 750 type bottle. I had a hard time getting the muesli off the wire. It was a thin wire twisted way more than 6 times, unlike a bottle of champagne, and ended up cutting it off with my Leatherman. Really ghetto going down there in the kitchen. It was not pretty. But again, it's more of a French style made with the heirloom apples. I think for complexity and elegance, I really like this one. This was number 1. I would say the JK's, the pear, is probably most enjoyable off dry, but I'm really liking the pumpkin one too. It's not too pumpkin-y. It's not my favorite finish, but I really love that it's not too, it's not in your face.
Yeah.
It harkens to fall without shoving it down your throat.
Mm-hmm.
Or I
that
should
is
say,
nice.
it just kisses you, but doesn't stick its fall tongue down your throat. Yeah. So, what about Wino Radar, girl?
Okay, we have an announcement. It's the Wine to 5 book club time, and we have decided on the next book. It was a recommendation from our patron and friend Kathy in Tennessee, and it's the autobiography A Glass Full of Miracles by Mike Gergich, the Mike Gergich of Gergich Hills Winery. And so we love this suggestion, Kathy, and thank you so much for posting it on our Facebook community page because, number 1, Mike's daughter, Violet Gergich, was a guest on our podcast a year ago. So it's kind of cool, on the anniversary. So back in episode 79, we did have Violet on the show and she mentioned the book. And so it's so perfect that this is what's going to be on our book club. And then also in 2017, this year, Gergich Hills is celebrating their 40th anniversary. It is a big deal and I'm so happy for them. We are also excited to say that they are reopened for business. They survived those wildfires and everybody's safe. And they would love people to come visit and they'd love people to taste their wine and celebrate their 40th anniversary. So we do have some links and you can check that out and any updates at Gergich Hills. And as a reminder, if you are excited as we are about our book club, use the hashtag W25BookClub on social media. You can order the book through our blog and website. You'll see a little link there with a picture of the book. And then also, just to make sure you have it on your radar, is December 21st, we will be having our book review episode. So that should give you more than a month to get the book and enjoy reading it and then participate in some of your book review comments.
We also have links in episode 132 blog, and we'll go ahead and repeat them in this blog as well for how you can help the California wildfire victims. I mean, entire neighborhoods are decimated. So I just wanted to put that out there that there are some really comprehensive links. One is from PBS NewsHour, and the other one is from a California-based website that has just links and links and links of charities. And if you live out there and you want to volunteer or you're an animal lover, whatever it is that speaks to your heart, you can go there as a resource. So if you're not checking out our blog, we are putting things that are actually useful, believe it or not. So,
not just fun, but yes, very useful things. And connecting the greater wine world is kind of what we're all about.
Yes.
Yes.
So shout out, Steph.
I did have some shout outs. I can't believe sometimes I look back on the last time we recorded, which was 8 days ago. I have a lot of shout outs to some local people. Chef Justin Miner at Hearth Restaurant and Pub. He hosted us for the first time for Wine with Lunch and did an outstanding job, and his enthusiasm for food is infectious. We are so excited that we will continue to be there for Wine with Lunch. And then Jim at Locality Kitchen and Bar, he was so fun. He came over. He is the owner of the restaurant. And he came over to meet Andrea Rogers when we were having lunch, and Jim gave us a little surprise dessert treat. And it was a local coffee liqueur that is from Elevation 5003. I love their falernum. They have such great spirits there. But this coffee liqueur he gave us, because he really wanted us to check it out, with a little bit of milk foam on top. It was so outstanding. And so he was fun. We were geeking out about spirits. And then I also want to just give some more shout out and love to my friends Bill and Margie, who opened some beautiful Vouvrays, and we had a nice lunch together, and our neighbors Mark and Viv, who took care of my house while I was gone, and then they bring me wine. I'm like, wait a second. So it was fun to open some bottles and share stories with them. They always come with Domaine Carneros vintage bubbly, and that is so awesome. So thank you, everybody. And another shout out, my neighbor Herb gave me a copy of Eric Asimov's recent article in the New York Times called 5 Common Wine Myths Debunked. Newspaper articles.
Can you give us your standout from that article? What is the one myth that he debunked that we did not know?
Well, I don't think it's necessarily something you and I didn't know, but I think it's something that's good for the general public to know. I particularly liked where he talked about serving temperatures, which is what you and I try to preach, so we're hopefully hammering it down to everybody. But a lot of people serve their wine, just like I was mentioning with the cider, too cold. Their white wines are too cold. So he went in particular description of a tasting that he had, and every one of these myths, there was these 5 myths that he went over. And I like the temperature one. And then the vintage fixation, where, you know, people only buy sometimes or gravitate to the great vintages of a certain area, and then they miss out on how approachable the non-great vintages are. And so at the tasting that he was at, they served the same wine, but one was a great vintage and one wasn't. And, you know, Eric's comments were how enjoyable and pleasurable the not great vintage is, and people don't realize that. It's like, you know, you're missing out and you're spending way too much money if you actually want to open and enjoy the wine. It's different if you're buying it for financial investment reasons.
Right. That is interesting, because last week we were drinking 2006s.
Yeah.
And in some areas of the world, it was a stellar vintage. In California, it was a good vintage for some grapes and not others.
Right.
And it also depends on where. You can't just say all over California.
Well, yeah. And even beyond that, I mean, it's a personal preference. I mean, it all goes back down to who said it was a great vintage and for what exactly, you know, I mean, and for what time frame. I mean, some people, just like with decanting, he didn't talk about the decanting or aeration, but, you know, that's personal preference.
It is, unless you have something where hail wipes out the entire vineyard and you have a few grapes left and you make a few great bottles, and you could say, okay, hail took out half our crop, it reduced our yield, therefore we had, you know, an outstanding vintage or whatever. You know, they use all these different, I don't pay much attention to it.
Yeah.
Again, if you're investing, but I don't believe in that. Life is short. I'm not going to have great bottles in my cellar, hopefully, when I die. I hope I drink them all.
Yes, exactly. So something to check out. But yeah, Eric, I do like his writing and I do like his topics. So we do have a link, and he has been on the show.
He was fun.
He was so much fun, and he's a good storyteller. And if you haven't listened to that episode, then we do have a link so you can check that out, or you can just go find it yourself. It was 72. So yeah, that was props, you know, to the greater wine world at large again.
Yes, and this brings us to the end of the show.
Yes.
So we have to give out Patreon love. And we love to give out Patreon love. We just don't like the show to end, but we're going to go ahead and give shout outs to our tenacious tasters, Jeff E. from the award-winning We Like Drinking podcast, Lynn from Savor the Harvest, Sebastian of Sassy Italy Tours, Jen in Maryland, Dave and Lisa in Illinois.
It's not 5 o'clock and we don't care. And Val and I don't care either. And neither do these listeners. Meg in South Dakota, Clay in Arizona, in California, John, Andrew, and Iswani, Chantel in Ontario, Mary Lou in Pennsylvania, Kathy in Georgia, and in Colorado, Chris and Janet, and Diane. And in Illinois, we have Renee and Steve, Kathy in Tennessee, thank you so much for the book recommendation, and Ashley in North Carolina.
And our Tastemaker listeners include David in Scotland, Carol in Kentucky, and our Wine-tastic listener, Laura. Thank you guys so much. Go to our Patreon page for more details about how you can become a supporter of the show and be entered into our monthly drawing for exclusive content and swag. And speaking of which,
it's that time for the monthly drawing.
It's paper bag time. All class here at Wine to Five.
It is world class. And I think this is an exciting gift this time because whoever wins this, and we're trying to stretch it out, with the drama here, but the winner is going to host an upcoming episode with us in January 2018, baby. Who is it, Val?
Yeah, we're cheap like that. So your gift for October of the co-host episode of Wine to Five is Clay.
Oh my gosh! You're gonna love that, Val. Oh, watch out. Mr. Clay's coming on the show.
Oh my gosh. Well, we are looking forward to hearing from Mr. Clay, and I'm assuming he is a wine lover.
He does like wine. He's learning a lot, and he bought his first case of wine this year.
Excellent.
Because he usually buys like one bottle at a time. Now he's getting like a whole case at a time.
Well, he's going to come on and he gets to have some input into the topic as well. So congratulations, Clay. We are so looking forward to talking with you in the new year. That is fantastic. And as usual, we're here for you every week. Between episodes, you can find us on the social spaces, the @Wine2Five on the Twitter, and you can find us on the Facebook. Listen to me. You can find us on the Facebook. And we have a group called the Wine to Five Community. You can check it out there. A lot of postings going on. I'm Val. You can find me on Twitter @WineGalUnboxed and on the Vino with Val Facebook, Instagram, and Pinterest. And Steph is on Twitter, Pinterest, and Instagram as the Wine Heroine.
Yay!
And we're holding up our arms in victory because we've reached the end of the show. So until next week, everybody, cheers!
Thank you for listening to the Wine to Five podcast. Be sure to check us out at Facebook/WineTWO5 and tune in next week for more fun and useful sip tips.